You are listening to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour, a podcast released on the first 3 Wednesdays of the month. Family crisis, relationship crisis, addiction crisis, no two crisis situations are the same. They vary by family, individual, and relationship. They can encompass complex family dynamics, emotional distress, anger issues, and entitlements, and often involve substance abuse. This podcast addresses these issues and others surrounding the addiction epidemic currently plaguing this country and the world. There is hope and help.
Are you stuck, scared, or unsure of what to do next? If a situation with a loved one, spouse, or even a child has started to spiral, possibly becoming dangerous or threatening, it's time to seek help. My name is Scott H. Silverman. I help families navigate crisis situations. I'm the person you turn to in order to get you and your loved ones unstuck.
Welcome back to the show. This is Michael Glenn Moore, and you're listening to Scott H. Silverman's Happy Hour. Today, Scott, we have another guest that is from Las Vegas. So we've had quite a few from Las Vegas. Why don't you go ahead and give your information and introduce our guest?
I'll do it. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I think people are hiding in Nevada. I think the taxes are just less expensive there. Plus, it's really nice and hot. Well, this is Scott H. Silverman. Welcome to Happy Hour. We do this every week, and our goal is to bring on what we think are the thought leaders and those who can't help themselves but be hopeless helpers. I think I heard that phrase on the Mobilize Recovery, Ryan. So today we have Mr. Ryan Hampton, and I got something off your website. But again, my printer ran out of paper at the 150 page. So quite a history, Ryan. So I don't know, get many years. How many years recovery? So I want to get that right.
5.5, almost 6. February 2nd, 2015.
Okay. All right. Well, we only have today, brother. So anyway, right. I have over 5 years on this thing. So I wanted to make sure it's right. Well, anyway, Ryan Hampton's rocketed to the center of America's rising addiction recovery advocacy movement. Probably because he was doing some form of stimulants back in his day. Former White House staffer, he has worked with multiple nonprofits, national recovery advocacy campaigns. He's now a prominent leading face. Thank God it's a good one. And a voice of addiction recovery, and it's changing the national conversation about addiction. With the content that reaches over 1 million people a week, Ryan's breaking down cultural barriers that have kept, I have this right, that have kept us aware of what's taking place. He's part of the core team that released the first ever U.S. Surgeon General's report on addiction in 2016 and was signed out by Forbes as top social entrepreneur and recovery movement. Ryan connects a vast network of people who are passionate about ending the drug epidemic in America. He's been featured by and has contributed to media outlets such as USA Today, MSNBC, Fox and Friends, the New York Times, NPR, HLN, Vice, Forbes, Slate, Huffington Post, The Hill, The Wall Street Journal, and others. A former aide to President Bill Clinton, Ryan has received praise from Democrats and Republicans alike for addressing addiction as a trans-political issue, crossing the political spectrum to build an inclusive coalition focused on solutions. He worked closely with the Trump White House, Senate Democrats, Republicans, U.S. House leadership, crafting portions of the historic H.R. 6. I'm not going to read anymore. It just goes on and on.
I don't blame you.
No, I want to honor this because you've done a lot of work, and I think, what are you, 23 years old or something? And
oh God, I wish I was 23.
but one thing I do want to mention is your first book, American Fix: Inside the Opioid Addiction Crisis and How to End It, has recently come out in 2018 August, and I'm sure it's a bestseller, and I'm sure Ryan will talk a little bit about that. So before we go to you, Ryan, I'm just going to give out my contact info, and I want you to shove yours out in the front, and we'll do that at the close as well. Scott H. Silverman, Happy Hour. Please call me, reach me, text me anytime. 619-993-2738. 619-993-2738. Text or call me anytime, and you can reach me at yourcrisiscoach.com. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ryan, to just tell us whatever you think you want us to know. And I've put together a couple of questions, and if I can read my own handwriting, I'm going to hammer them all out. But before we go, tell us who you are, tell us why you're here, and tell us what you have to say and why it's so important. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Scott, for having me. And it's been a great honor and pleasure to get to know you through our Mobilize Recovery Initiative and the work that you do. I appreciate everything you do, and to everyone who's listening, Thank you for tuning in and being aware and showing up, because certainly, the days that we live in have been quite hard. The last couple of months, I guess since the COVID pandemic started, have been hard for me, because we've lost that, in-person connectivity. But even in these times of, what people may call social and others call, physical distancing, we are able to keep some level of emotional proximity. And I think through technology and, podcasts such as yours and the Happy Hour, people are able to stay plugged in and tuned in. So thank you for providing that platform. You mention, go through that bio, and I get dizzy sometimes reading it myself. And I always get a little shy when others read it, because it certainly didn't start out like that for me, and was not my intent, to enter recovery. I first and foremost, it's always important that I self-identify myself. As you said, my name is Ryan Hampton. I'm an author, I'm an activist, I'm an advocate, I'm a dog lover, I'm a fiance, I'm getting married hopefully soon. COVID has put a little bit of a wrench in the works for the date. I'm a voter, I'm a taxpayer. Probably most importantly to me, though, I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means I haven't felt it necessary to have a drink or a drug or any other mind-altering substance since February 2nd, 2015. And back to what I was saying before, IDing myself is I didn't wake up on February 3rd, 2015 and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to, go to Congress and, bang down the doors for HR 6 and the patients, Support for Patients and Communities Act. I'm going to go do, naloxone training. I'm going to go reconnect with President Clinton and launch this overdose response initiative, or found the Voices Project, or Recovery Advocacy Project, or work with Facebook for, Mobilize Recovery and Google. And that wasn't in the plan or in the cards at all. Quite frankly, when I walked out of treatment and I was able to access treatment by a stroke of luck, pure stroke of luck, through Medicaid. I was living in California at the time. I had nowhere to go. And it was a housing provider who brought me in and let me stay there and helped me find a job. And peers of mine who lived at that house, who lifted me up when I couldn't lift myself up. And, I was unemployable for the first 6-7 months of my recovery, and started driving Uber. I got a car. I got an old used car, and started driving Uber in 2016. And it wasn't that led me to where I'm at today. It was really watching my community getting destroyed by the overdose crisis early on, and friends of mine and roommates of mine and people I had gone to treatment with, and people that I loved and cared about who were seeking help, or in the process of seeking help. And they were being turned away from hospitals, emergency rooms after overdoses. They were being kicked out of homes. They were being denied insurance coverage. And as someone who formerly had a background, a career in political organizing before getting hooked on heroin, I kind of knew that there was some connectivity between politics and connectivity between community organizing and work to be done within the recovery community to make sure that our voices are heard. And the first thing I did was tell my story, right? And I think that that's a very powerful moment for all of us. And I did that in May of 2016 through a opinion piece that I wrote for the Huffington Post called "Why I Started Facing Addiction Out Loud." And I was very nervous when I did that, because it was the first time that I was going to kind of own my story in the public domain. And I wrote this op-ed and submitted it on a whim to the Huffington Post, and they accepted it, and it got published. And 2 weeks following that, I had people reaching out to me from all over the country, and people I had worked with in a former life, and former political organizers, and they were sharing their stories with me and telling me about, how some of them had been in recovery. One particular person I was close to, Chris Wayne, who I worked at the Clinton White House with, how he had been in recovery for 30 years. And this was all, in the context of this was happening, me telling my story at the same time 4 years ago, a little bit longer than 4 years ago, when we were in the midst of the 2016 presidential election. And everybody was like, well, we need to, keep talking about this. And what are some of the things you need to see in your community? And what is it that we can be doing? And I decided to travel the country that summer, and went from California to Philadelphia and back, and crossed 22 states, and logged 8,000 miles over 30 days with my best friend, and stayed and stopped in communities hit hardest by the crisis, to hear from people, to listen to them, to see what their concerns were, what they were experiencing. And a lot of what I was experiencing in Southern California was happening all across this country in different pockets and in different ways, right? We stopped in jails and in prisons, and we went inside of them, and we went to recovery centers and stayed at homes where families had lost loved ones to overdoses, and stopped at churches and recovery community organizations, and met with policy leaders and members of Congress, and just became this sponge for information. And got back from that trip and decided, I have to keep doing this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have to keep doing this. I have to keep listening to the community and seeing how we can respond collectively, because what we were missing is this was a top issue, and it remains a top issue at the time, but there were so many people who were impacted and affected, and we just weren't organized. And I kept hearing these numbers from nonprofits that I was working with. There's 23 million people in recovery and long-term recovery in the United States. And there's another, 22 to 24 million people who are struggling right now who need help. And you add those numbers together, and it's about 1 in 3 American households. But if there's so many people who have been impacted, not just that need help, but that are in recovery or have lost a loved one to an overdose, why are we so slow to see solutions? Why are we being ignored when it comes to funding decisions? And my hypothesis was it's because we weren't organized. We weren't showing up as an organized constituency like other, issue-based causes do, right? So like gun rights or abortion or, education or healthcare. Like, we have the people, we just need to organize them. And that's when I started tinkering around with the idea of the Voices Project, which was really an effort to start to get people to shed stigma, but really to tell their stories, but not just for telling their stories and then taking that next step, right? I call it the journey of what's next. Because after I told my story, I then wanted to see what was behind door 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, what is it that I could do with my story? How could we, how could I use that public narrative, right? And we learned about this in Mobilize, use that story of self and turn it into a story of us that involves our community, and then a story of now. What are we going to ask our community and people with power to do? And that's when the Voices Project was born. And shortly after that, the Recovery Advocacy Project. And we built a platform that was reaching well over 1 million people every single week, right? And we started organizing people state by state. We started connecting, utilizing technology and Zoom. And we did this without much money too. That was the thing. Like, people think that you need all this money to start an organization and a movement. Well, some of the most successful movements in this country, particularly around social justice, started with no money, right? Nothing at all. We have resources. We just have to identify what those are. We have our stories. We've got our feet. We've got technology that we can harness. We've got tools, digital tools that we can use. And that was how it was born. And, where we met, Scott, through the Mobilize initiative, which kicked off last year, Mobilize Recovery was really an effort, and is an effort and an initiative to take all of this learning and these tools and best practices around community organizing and leadership development, because people in recovery and recovery advocates need to kind of go through that process of what makes an effective, leader, and what servant leadership is, because that's really what we are. We serve our community. How do we inspire more leaders into this movement? And Mobilize Recovery is an initiative that tries to bring all of that information together over the course of 2 or 3 days, to get people excited, and then to provide the continuing assistance to them over the course of a year, where they can employ these tactics and these leadership skills into their communities to make change. So, we're here in Las Vegas, but we connect with people all around the country. We're not service oriented, meaning that, people ask, like, what is it that you do? Do you get people into treatment? Do you work with treatment? We don't work with treatment centers. We don't get people into treatment. That's not what we do. There's plenty of people that do that. Our goal simply is to build an organized constituency around recovery in the context of community organizing and political change, so that we have more treatment, right? So that we have more harm reduction. So we have more family support services. So we have more recovery residences, right? So we have more long-term care supports, because really what we have right now is insufficient, right? The treatment gap in this country is 90%. It's been hanging at 90% for well over a decade now, right? 9 out of 10 people who are qualified and need treatment for a substance use disorder will never see the doors of a treatment center or any qualified treatment opportunity because of things like insurance discrimination, access to care. They live in an area where it doesn't exist, right? I mean, these are real problems. And then looking beyond the treatment continuum, right? Because it's not just about getting someone into treatment. It's about supporting them over those first 5 years, right? We still look at this as an acute problem. We deal with it as an acute problem. We call it a public health crisis. We call it a chronic healthcare problem. Yet all the solutions that we have to offer to people are 30 days of treatment, 60 days of treatment, 90 days of treatment, then we send them on their way. But the United States Surgeon General in 2016 provided the data to us in the first ever Surgeon General's report, which clearly stated that if we can get someone past year 5, right, 5 years of sustained recovery, they have an 85% chance of maintaining that recovery for the rest of their lives, But the federal funding and state funding that we get right now really only provides someone that kind of, services gap for maybe those first couple of months. It's ridiculous. We have so much further that we need to go. And hopefully through our work, through Mobilize and through Voices Project and Recovery Advocacy Project, we can help to, close those gaps piece by piece.
Well, that was a lot of information, Ryan. Thank you. And, and I love when you get going, because you get cranked up a little bit, and I can see your pulse rate going and your heart rate going and your passion going. And, the only thing you didn't mention was stigma. And I want to ask you about stigma, because everything you've just described, as a guy in long-term recovery, if all goes well, knock on wood, and I've God in a higher power, because one's Jewish and the other one we can't figure out. I think they're non-sectarian, just so I have a balance in my recovery. November 13th will be my 36th year, and 36 is a lucky number in the Jewish faith. So, I've been around for a while, and I was always excited when we finally connected. And the work that you're doing is, and I know, one of the things I like to do, and Michael and I talked about it, was give our guests an opportunity to create 5 questions. And you're so busy, you didn't even have time. And I know that you probably sleep about an hour a day, because you see the need, and the deeper you get into this, and you're seeing it from a whole different level than I am. I've never really been an organizer. What I do is kind of like, I call it taking it one Rotary Club at a time. And the problem is that's just so slow. And, we just hit a benchmark in San Diego where 3 people are overdosing a day just on opioids, just in San Diego, and we're a pretty good sized market, but still, we're a border town. We've had the campaigns for years. That the DA's got an aggressive opioid campaign. I run a nonprofit called Safe Homes Coalition, removing unused and unsafe medication. But the morbidity rate continues to grow. And, when you talk to people and they still describe this as a moral failing, it's amazing. So for me, the stigma, so take a second or two and talk to us about the stigma, because of the work that you do, you're touching people. I met just in Mobilize, the 3 days I was there learning, you had, but the mayor of Boston was there, Bill Clinton was there, Newt Gingrich was there, and Patrick Kennedy was there. And then those are just the names that
Elton John and Macklemore. And yeah, we had a lot of people there.
It was amazing. And, these are people who are very, I don't think Clinton identified having an active addiction, but, if he doesn't, he knows someone who does. And there's probably someone in his family, if not an addiction, a mental health issue. And I'm going to get one point that I'm going to ask you to answer that question. According to science, for every active, untreated substance abuser in our community or self-medicator, when they wake up in the morning, they're going to impact 7 other people negatively throughout their day. So when you add the 15% and then you put the 7 out of 10, that's 70, that's 85% of our country are impacted by individuals who are going untreated. So to your point, not having the resources and not having the ability when someone says, hey, I need help, or a family member convinces them that they might, and they do, there should be an easy way for them to go get that kind of help. We have urgent care everywhere. You can go get your temperature taken and your blood pressure taken. And we've seen through COVID, if we put a lot of energy into the right directions, a lot of great things can happen. So I'm sorry, back to the stigma question. How do we deal with stigma, and what has been your experience on how we can kind of battle that as well?
Sure. I mean, stigma is like a really kind word for what is, prejudice, systemic discrimination, bias against people in recovery and people who need help. Like, stigma is just like a nice way to gloss over like real, prejudice towards people who use drugs, people who are in recovery. And when we address, those prejudices and discrimination, we've got to do it from the top. We need protections that aren't just in the, Americans with Disability Act or through healthcare parity, which was passed. The insurance discrimination that happens in this country is a crime every single day. We need enforcement. There are certainly enough people, that are coming out of the woodwork and out of the shadows to share either their experience as a family member or a loved one or a person in recovery themselves, that people are able to more identify with it, right? We've got to take, some lessons from the LGBTQ movement, right? When people started coming out of the closet, right? Being gay, like I am, like it was highly stigmatized, right? Family members didn't want to talk about their loved ones that were gay. And it took more and more people to really build momentum to a place where right now, as of right now in 2020, we have marriage equality. 72% of Americans support that, right? That number, if you go back to 1997, that number was under a third of Americans. Like, we have made major progress in terms of LGBTQ equality and rights, but that's as a result of more people coming out. But as more people came out, federal laws, state laws, regulations changed, more protections for a class of people went into place, right? Housing discrimination was a big issue, right? That had to be dealt with on a state and federal basis. Employers came out and started making more safe space for LGBTQ Americans. Like, we have to take it kind of system by system. And we're starting to see some of that today, right? We're starting to see more recovery ready employer workplaces, right? Where employers are better trained and equipped to work with people in recovery, and also to work with an employee when it becomes obvious they have a substance use disorder, right? Another big piece of this is the language that we use. The language that we use is incredibly powerful, and how we talk about our community to the outside world is incredibly powerful and important. The word abuse, for existence, is a word that, SAMHSA and the United States federal government have, even though it's still the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that takes an act of Congress to change, and hopefully that will happen in the coming Congress. But they've issued guidance on this to stop using words like abuse, right? That we use misuse, right? That when we talk about addiction, we talk about addiction or substance use disorder. We have our own kind of personal lingo within our own 12-step community, and I use it. But when we go outside to the outside world, we're not using words like addict and junkie and things like that. Those words have negative connotations on people. And if we're talking about a healthcare problem, which is really what we are talking about, we have to start talking about it in a different way. And that is one thing that people can be doing at home, is how we talk about this issue to our outside community. But we have, don't be mistaken, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go when it comes to discrimination, prejudice, stigma, whatever you want to call it. But the more and more people that are coming out, I felt comfortable coming out because I saw others doing it, right? Like, I saw others doing it, so I followed in those footsteps. The more we do that, and the more that we can relate with our communities, the further we'll get. But a lot of this is codified, right, in federal and state laws. Here in Nevada, we had an anti-stigma bill that passed the legislature in 2018. It removed stigmatizing language from all state regulation, right? There was some very heavily stigmatizing language in our state regulation when it came to people with disabilities, people with mental health, issues, people with substance use disorders, and we wiped all of that clean from state regulation in 2018. Like, there's small steps we can be taking, but I would say we're probably a good decade out, if not more, to get to where the LGBTQ community is. A lot of this work we're doing right now, there's just so many parallels with that community and addiction. It's fascinating, right? I mean, a marginalized population, that was dealing with a healthcare problem in terms of HIV/AIDS, that started coming out of the shadows, that built a movement, that wasn't just a community-based movement within families, but it was a political movement that worked towards more money towards research and treatment and harm reduction, right? More civil liberties and civil rights. Those are the same issues that we're dealing with today. And I know a lot of people don't see it that way, but when you really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how we're dealt with when we hit the healthcare system or when we show up to a hospital and how doctors perceive us, I mean, this is, there are a lot of similarities.
I agree with everything you're saying, and I don't agree with a lot of people about a lot of things, and I literally lost this November. My brother died 31 years ago.
Sorry.
HIV/AIDS, and that's in the day when nobody knew what they were doing. He was at UCLA with experimental medication, and it was a sad time. So I've had a chance in my adulthood to really have understand, be compassionate, have empathy, and understand that there are ways to change things. I mean, part of the reason Happy Hour was created is to set a platform, to have a voice. We have a couple minutes left, and
I do want to say there's one thing though that is important when we talk about stigma, discrimination, healthcare, when we talk about substance use disorder or mental health. Like, there's one thing that is essential, and there is whether it's from a policymaker, a doctor, a treatment professional, a community member, there is absolutely no substitution for empathy. Empathy is like a starting point. If we're going to make any progress, like, empathy is like the floor.
Right. And that's, I think that's one of my drivers. So what I want to do is I have a couple questions I want to ask you, but I'm going to ask you to kind of give me heartfelt, quick responses, because I want to get these
lightning round.
I did the lightning round. I actually wrote them down. So your proudest moment, quick answer.
Proudest moment was getting engaged.
Okay.
In June of 2019 to Sean Henry O'Donnell. It was my absolute proudest moment of my life.
Yeah, I was a little worried when you said things were shifting a little bit. I thought maybe you found somebody new or they got rid of you, but you're just saying with the COVID issue, you want to.
Yeah, we'll be getting, I think we're opting for a Zoom wedding, but yeah, June 17, 2019, I got engaged to Sean, and it was proudest moment.
You're in Las Vegas. You can always do it twice. They say you hit the
Elvis.
And then you Elvis. Exactly. All right. Next question. Your biggest regret.
My biggest regret?
Yep.
Biggest regret was not coming out as an LGBT person sooner, because I think that contributed to a lot of shame within myself that kept me sick within my own substance use disorder for a long time.
Okay. I put down happiest moment, but I kind of think you answered that with your proudest moment.
Same thing.
I want to give you happiest moment. Do you want to echo that same one, or do you want to come up with another one? Happiest
same
moment.
Say happiest moment, definitely the same one.
Well, hopefully today will be one of your happiest moments as well. Okay.
Well, today is always my best day.
There you go.
Today is definitely my best day.
And we're here with you celebrating it. So yeah. Great. So what should, we know about you that maybe you haven't shared globally yet that you would like to share?
I put everything on my, I wear everything on my sleeve as much as I can. I will say, in terms of me personally, that people may not know, is actually I am incredibly shy and I am an introvert. So believe it or not, I don't know how that works, but I am.
Clearly not demonstrated here today, but that's good. It's good. You're turning red. I like to see that. Yeah. So I don't want to miss the opportunity. So take about 30 seconds. Tell us about Mobilize Recovery. I know it's a huge movement. I mean, I was part of a 3-day, 350 person adventure to learn, to share, and to get angry and frustrated. And
I encourage anybody who wants information on it to go to recoveryvoices.com. I would also ask if you are somebody who was frustrated like me about making change in your own community, real progressive change when it comes to addressing the overdose crisis, and are looking for the tactics, the tools, and a network of people all across this country who who feel the same way, join us at Mobilize, because we want to give you those tools, and we're not looking to sell you anything. It does not cost anything. This is literally a charitable nonprofit that provides this to our community because we have to build this, and we have to build it together. And I encourage you to check it out at recoveryvoices.com or mobilizerecovery.org, and join us.
Well, by the way, let me correct you. There are two things you have to invest. One is your time, and you have to think. That's it. But that's not bad.
We do ask for your time. We don't ask for any monetary value. We do ask.
No. I point that out for a reason, because I did a lot of thinking those days, and I've shared with you. I've been around this the field of recovery and helping others and understanding and watching the DSM. I think 1 go to DSM 5 in my lifetime. I've been on the planet a while. So next question, point I want you to make, please, is tell us quickly about your book, American Fix.
Right. American Fix was I came home one day in 2017 after, shortly after that trip. It was in the new year. The election had happened. There was a lot of ambiguity about what was going on. And I went to a bookstore looking for a book on solutions to the opioid crisis, not from the lens of a journalist or another celebrity, but, telling me about their rock bottom, but more about what we could be doing in communities. I couldn't find that book. Came home. My roommate told me at the time, "Why don't you write something?" I said, "That's absolutely crazy." And the next day I picked up pen and paper and started writing some thoughts down. Took it to a few publishers, and Macmillan, St. Martin's Press, which is one of the world's largest publishers, one of the big 5, said they wanted to publish the book, and I hadn't even written it yet. They wanted something on the solutions from someone who had lived it and was also on the ground working with other communities. And the book is very, people get it, and sometimes they're a little upset because it's not necessarily my story, although my story is weaved in and out of it. It's other people that I've met from around the country who've inspired me, solutions that are happening in small towns and pockets across this country that we can be implementing in all 50 states, in my opinion, and really offers a prescriptive agenda for how we could start to bring ourselves out of one of the largest, health crises of our generation. And that's, ergo the title American Fix. I would say, people always ask me, like, well, you call it American Fix. Do you think this is, an American problem, like how we deal with it? I'm like, the way we got into this crisis is American, and the way we're dealing with it is uniquely American, right? Because there are solutions from all around the world that we could be adopting, but we don't. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it is, and people can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any local bookstore. They can get it, through my website at ryanhampton.org. But yeah, it was quite a journey and quite a hoot that I actually wrote the book. I still, it's one of those things that I'm just like, I can't believe you actually did that. But, hopefully I'm working on a second one right now. So we'll see how that goes.
Of course you are. And probably a third in the back of your mind. So last and final question from me before I turn it back over to Michael. If you had a magic wand, what would you do with it?
I would ensure that every single person in this country has a place to live and has a basic income, because I believe that those are two things that are essential, particularly in our area around addiction recovery. People can't stay sober. People can't get into recovery if they don't have a roof over their head or combat poverty.
Very good. I ran an organization for 18 years called Second Chance, and that theory behind it was, if you don't have a job, you can't have an address. If you don't have an address, you can't get a job.
That's right.
Well, Ryan, thanks. I'm going to turn it back over to Michael before we wrap it up. Michael, any questions? I know you always catch the good ones that I miss.
Well, I was just wondering, Ryan, when you were still using, where did you get your meds? Did you go through the street, or did you have doctors, several doctors, or okay? Yeah. So that's something that I think a lot of people go through. That fortunately, the fentanyl problem probably wasn't as bad back then when you were.
I missed fentanyl by like a hair. Like I had used fentanyl, but I missed the fentanyl crisis. Literally, I'm convinced had I have waited, had Medicaid not have come through on when it did for me, and it would have been a couple more weeks or months, I would have been right in the beginning of the fentanyl crisis. I'd probably be dead. Like, no doubt about it.
I can't tell if you're bragging or complaining with that comment.
Yeah. That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now who's got you're going to see us out with the quote? Is that going to be Scott or you?
I have a quote. I actually have a quote for you guys. It's one of, so I love politics. I love, studying history. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that I reference often. All the great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honor, duty, mercy, and of course, hope.